Hi, everyone. We were given a countdown to say hello. So good evening and thank you for joining us today. I think I'm one of the fortunate moderators today because I have with me two individuals who are already so very well known and so popular, not just in Kolkata, not just in the writing world, but worldwide. So it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce to you once more Anuja Chauhan, Nilanjana S. Roy. Both of them are very well known to us for their writing. One's writing is known for its lightness. Nilanjana's writing, much more in-depth, much heavier, but both brilliant writers. And so much of enjoyment in both. I've just finished reading The Black River myself, Nilanjana. Can I just say, it's visual poetry. The imagery is just so wonderful. I really, really enjoyed it. And Anuja, what can I say? You don't need to be told that Club You to Death took us to a place that reminds us of childhood, brings us nostalgia, brings us happiness, reminds us of our parents, at least those of us who've lived the club culture. There's so much in there that's light, but also very, very, innovating in a sense. So, just before we came up on stage, we were all talking about dreamy Bengalis and bottles of wine. So you'll see that we are still in a rather light mood at this point. But we're just going to chill tonight. We're not going to have any heavy conversation around writing or books. But I'd like to ask you, Anuja, go to the place where you didn't want to go first, which is your childhood. Tell us about your childhood, the army background, and how it influenced this book.
Yes, actually what Radhika and I were talking about, Nilanjana as well, was how hazy I am about my midlife memories and how clear my childhood is to me. Crystal clear, I can remember it so clearly. And my childhood was a very cantonment childhood. It was all about, we were posted hereabouts as well. My dad served in Kalimpong, in the northeast, in Kashmir, all over the place. And I was the youngest of 4 sisters. And my sisters were very beautiful, and they had a lot of admirers, and they never wanted to give them any importance, but I wanted to marry all the admirers. I was like, I'll have him, you don't want him, I'll take him. So it's always been, my life has always been about hanging back, standing on the side, and seeing all these glamorous people in my life, and watching them, and wanting to be like them, and recording what they do, and things like that. So... so I like people watching, and I guess that naturally then leads to a place where you would like to record that and put that down.
Yeah. Nilanjana, how about you? Same question. What are the childhood influences that brought about this book or are reflected in this book?
Well, first I want to say how glad I am to be in Kolkata, which is the city of my birth. And I had to prevent myself from unabashedly fangirling at Anuja out here. Because under the garb of entertainment, what she manages to smuggle into every one of her books, from social history to so much else, is something that I'm deeply envious of. I wish I could write like her, but I can only write like me. But where did the writing come from is what you're really asking. And I think that came from being a quiet, slightly goofy kid, both in Calcutta and in Delhi, the 2 cities that really shaped me, who hid behind, that mask of shyness. What you were really doing again was what Anuja picked up on, the people watching. That's where the attention went. And I belong to this very large Bengali Uriya family where everybody was a storyteller. There were raconteurs, there were people who also wrote little sketches, there were a few casual poets flung around. And the dinner table was pretty much a wonderfully gossipy but also extremely competitive arena. And I guess writing is my revenge on all those years of being, the one who didn't have the great stories to tell.
Yeah, very true. Coming to Black River, did you have to do a lot of research to write this book? I know you come from a journalistic background and research is in your, in the way you work. But how much research and what kind of research did you do for Black River?
That is a good question because I don't know how many of you would have read Black River. So very briefly, It's about a murder that happens, a grievous murder, and one that was difficult to write about, of a young child in a border village right near Delhi. And the other strand in it is about 3 friends who are migrants to the city and who meet accidentally, settle down on the banks of the Yamuna. And then they don't realize it, but that friendship is going to last for 20, 30 years and carry them through losses and happinesses, both. I did a certain amount of research, but it was the other way around. I don't think I realized that I was doing research. My work was taking me into places because I was a gender reporter at that time for the New York Times. And it was taking me to places, to the city outside the city I was supposed to be in. Yeah? The people I was meeting there, whether they were women who are often cast as victims because they're homeless in some ways or because they're migrants, and there's that instinctive thing that goes off in our head saying, oh, poor things. They were having none of this. Huh? They were here to make a life for themselves, and their grasp of both happiness and resilience was, I think, in some ways much stronger than many of the people I saw in my own circuit. And at some point of time, the journalism became friendship. And one of the places it took me to was a colony that resembles Bright Dairy Colony, which is perched at the foot of a garbage mountain that grows higher and higher every year and bursts into flame. And instead of, going on and on about the environment and climate change, everybody's matter-of-fact way of dealing with this is that, the ghosts of the mountain, the jinns of the mountain. Today he's being a real pain in the neck. He's got into my lungs and I have this work to do. It's a very, you fold all of this that's happening into your work. At some point I realized that everything that I was seeing, I didn't have a container for it in nonfiction and in journalism. You stop short at 800 words and 1,200 words, and journalism forces you to keep moving on from people. But the more you see them, the more they become friends. Or if not friends, they become teachers, mentors, something is forged. And I kept wanting to go back to them. And that's probably where the book grew out of.
Anuja, I think you also said something like this in one of your earlier interviews. I noticed you come from advertising, right? Where you have to crunch words into 5 seconds, 10 seconds. So when you wrote your first novel, I think you really struggled to bring it out in a large, big format, right? How was that experience?
Yeah, well, it's different from journalism, but there is a sense of snappiness and moving on fast. So advertising is, the biggest sin in advertising is boring people. You can't bore people. You can't bring them down or low in life, because people who are low and depressed will not make purchase decisions. They won't just drop lots of money on buying something. So we're sort of invested in keeping people happy, keeping it snappy. That is the thing you do. And of course, everything is like an ad is 30 seconds long, 60 seconds long, 45 seconds long. So I really struggled writing a whole book. It was, I was so trained to think ki bas 30 seconds mein khatam ho jaye. And maybe it's good in a sense because, that way you percolate so much and you try to cut out the fat and get to 4, 5, 6, 7 words and try and encapsulate a huge thing, in a huge philosophy in just those 4, 5 words, whether it's Dar ke aage jeet hai or Tera hai par mera hai or Ye dil mange more or whatever it is, you bring it down, but there's no getting away from the fact that when you come down that much, you're losing nuance, you're losing depth, you're losing layers, and you're dumbing it down. So for me, it was all about, bhai, I don't want to leave things behind so fast. There's a whole book written in this line. Let me go back. Let me, pillow it and let me enjoy it and let me explore it. So for me, writing a book was very much about that. Very much about saying, let me have some therav and investigate in a sense so that I wake up every day excited to know what's going to happen. I'm going to write it, but I'm only excited, So the reason for getting at the ikigai or whatever, my children tell me nowadays, is just that you get out of bed because you want to know what will happen. You open your laptop, you start typing, and what may come out. And very often there's a huge sense of gratitude and thankfulness and saying, oh, wow, something has come down through me that has percolated through whatever I've been observing through life, and I'm putting it out here today. And it's as much a surprise to me as anyone else who might read it.
Just staying on that for a moment, both of you, actually, I'll come to you also with the same question. You've had very successful careers, both of you, and at some point, you chose to give up advertising formally, full-time, and move into writing. How was that decision? How did you take it? Was it difficult? It's a question I know many of us aspiring writers here would want to ask.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I think I was ahead of the trend in that sense of, getting that freedom to work where I want, freedom of location, which now for children today is a big deal, saying I can work anywhere in the world, I just need to have my laptop. So I did negotiate that for myself. And I did get to be in a place where I was employed and earning and calling the shots. In a small way, of course, not in a massive way, but in a chotu way. And there I think I took the call between, I think I just reached a point, Radhika, where I was uncomfortable with collaboration and other people's. I was like very intolerant and quite a terrorist in the sense that maybe you have something to say, but I don't want to hear it. I want to hear what I have to say. So it was quite obnoxious at one level. But I think if you want to be creative, then you have to be selfish at some point. And you have to be the unliked person in the room and the unpopular person in the room who says, "Nahi, what I say goes. Deal." And if people don't deal, you say, okay, fine, I'll take that salary cut and I'll take that cut in my global ambitions and go away and write a book, and everything that's in the book is what I want it to be. I'm just saying that, fine, what I write in here is what I choose to write. There's a lot of safety and there's a safety net when you are part of a huge system. Very often I would write something and the ad would come out there. Say it's a Pepsi commercial or a Kit Kat commercial or a Nokia commercial, and people say, I really like your ad. And I would say, but you should have seen the script. The script was 50 times better than the ad, but they dumbed it down. And whenever something failed, I had many people to blame for it. I could blame the client. I could blame the research. I could blame the execution, the director, and say he did it wrong. The actor, he couldn't do it well. Dhoni can't act for toffee. What will he do? And many people I can blame. And that's comfortable. But when you write a book, you can only blame yourself. There's nobody else. Nobody else. Editors, thank God, HarperCollins, they're amazing. They will never change anything I write. So it's all my fault. If something is shit, I created that crap. And if there are compliments to be earned, they're mine. And that's scary, but in a way that's good. And that's the choice I've made.
It's still your baby, right? Even if it's ugly, you love it.
No, yeah, I love it, but I would like other people to love it as well.
How about you, Nilanjana? Same question to you. How did the decision to quit your full-time journalism work, and we all know that you were a very successful journalist in your time. So how did that come about? Was it difficult to take that decision? Do you regret it at any point?
I took a vow of poverty as, as is only appropriate to us calling this serious. But really, it took me a long time to even begin to admit that I was going to write. Even though I'd been writing all along, and I had cardboard cartons filled with terrible short stories and even worse poems, which thankfully we'd lost in one of our moves, so nobody can ever read these. But right from the start, I knew that I wanted to be around reading and books. And my few attempts to, go for a job that had a fat paycheck in it, within about 3 months, forget about murder, I was contemplating nooses and knives and guns and gas. I was not in a happy state of mind. I just couldn't adapt to, not the corporate world. I quite liked offices. I really like this thing about offices where they have a coffee machine and, you can get 3 different kinds of coffee and stuff like that. And it's, at some point I realized, wait a second, offices are play school for adults. They don't have a sandpit. This is a bad thing. Because if offices had sandpits, adults would by and large be happy about them. But I didn't want to go to school when I was a kid. I wanted to stay home and read. And as an adult, you get to do that. But committing to writing, I think, my late 30s, I just said, okay, this is enough, It's your life and you either have to go for it. And I asked myself what the fear behind this was. And the fear that I was going to be, is that I was going to be a terrible writer. And I said, it's all right. I've read a lot of great books, but I've read a lot of terrible books, and their writers seem to do fine, you know. They seem to be okay. I'll just be one more out there. And then I sat down, and when you're actually writing, there is nothing else that you want to do. It doesn't matter whether it's a good day or a bad day at the job. You're sitting there, and you're alone with your imagination, but you're not alone at all. It's not just your characters, and my characters, they became friends, but they also rapped me on the knuckles when I got them wrong. You know, when I made one too syrupy and too pious, and she was like, no way, you know, I'm not having this. This is not me, you know. But you're living in a world that is absolutely as real as the world that we inhabit. And it's almost more real. It's more satisfying. It doesn't have the boring bits in it. And then the only question of urgency that you have is everything that you're seeing and experiencing and living in so vividly from the point of view of 5 different characters who are so different from each other. One of them is vulnerable and tender and loves the river and loves water. One of them is a cop who's not yet a cynic, but my God, he's heading in that direction. You know, one of them is a woman who's grappling with the fact that her religious identity is pushing her out of a city that she's grown to love. And one of them is a man who is a farmer, and he's brought up his young daughter, but he's also got this side of him which wants to go off and see the world. And they are loud inside your head. And when you're actually sitting there creating something, and Anuja has written so many books, so she knows what it's like to carry different worlds. There's nothing else in the world that comes close. And when you finish a book, all you want to do is to go back and do this again. So it's the most satisfying life that I can imagine.
Thank you. I mean, that's really satisfying to hear, you know, that the way this happens. Actually, thanks also for talking about the characters. My next question is that if, I know it's very difficult, but if you had to choose a favorite character from your book, who would it be? And I'm going to say who mine is as well.
Well, I don't think, you haven't met him, but there's a guy called Khalid, you know, who comes to the city as a young man, and he's a little bit of a dreamer. He comes from Bengal to Delhi. He's got the rivers running through his blood. And the thing that he does most of all is go out in his boats and hang out with the plants and the animals and stuff like that. And he's a little too gentle for the city. And I spent several drafts trying to rescue Khalid from himself and trying to make him a little more hard-headed. I said people change over time. And every time I looked around, Khalid was, you know, wandering around, playing his flute, refusing to get with the program. And I loved him because he stood, this is a Delhi book, but I think a lot of Calcutta is in it, you know. As with Delhi, it's a book about a changing landscape with the pressure of people on it. And it's a book about a city that's created maybe in the first wave by refugees or by people who are washed up here by history. But in the second wave, it's caused by migrants and transients and people who live very temporary lives, and they grow into a kind of permanence. And I loved Khalid because he refuses to compromise on his dreams of a life. You know, he refuses to just say that, okay, I want a house and I want 2 kids and everything. He's always looking off sideways. And that's why I couldn't protect him, but he was very special to me.
Audience, do you have a favorite character from Black River? Has anyone read Black River here? No? Lady at the back, do you want to tell us who your favorite character is? I can't see from here. Arshia. It'll have to carry back forward to us.
Khalid's also your
Nilanjana,
favorite.
Khalid. Mine's Chand. He's the hero in some senses. But I really liked the fleshing out of Chand's character. You know, especially his love for his daughter seemed very, very, you know, it just felt like me and my dad to some extent. I hope I don't die like that, but it just felt like that. You know? Anuja, who's your favorite character from Club You to Death?
Okay, yeah, this is a bit like asking a mom who her favorite kid is, as usual. But whenever I'm alone with one child, I always say, you're my favorite. There's nobody else, right? So for Club You to Death, I would have to pick, you know, this very beautiful, socialite, shallow, but maybe may have some depth to her character called Bambi Todi, which abbreviates to BT, which my kids tell me is bad trip, bro, bad trip. Bambi Todi is a BT. So she's a BT. And currently, I loved writing that character because there were depths. You know, I think no matter how shallow anybody is, there's always this ambition to be deeper and to be better. And I think she has that. And so I really enjoyed liking her. I'm always a sucker for making things funny. And Bambi Todi gave me huge scope for that, you know, because, and I always feel that if you have something deep to say, it's better to say it lightly. And again, it gave me, I could use her as a tool to say all those things that I wanted to say. Currently, Bambi Todi is in Bollywood. Very big actresses want to play her. And the movie is being directed by Homi Ajania. And it's exciting that it's nice to see beautiful actresses tagging me on Instagram because they want to play Bambi Todi. You know, I mean, you all need that validation, right? But I enjoyed writing her because she was, like I said, she was like the beaches in Goa. Like, she was damn shallow, but she had amazingly deep pockets here and there.
And she had a brain. She turned out to have a big brain, a good brain.
She had, everything was big only with her.
No, my favorite character also was Bambi Todi, and if you haven't read the book yet, I would recommend that you do read it because you will enjoy this.
I love writing Bambi Todi's person in one book, but it's a series, right? So I have the detective ACP Bhavani Singh, and he goes forward, and he goes on to investigate subsequent murders, and the current book I'm writing is also has Bhavani going out there and solving the crime. That's a nice person to write to.
He's the obvious choice of, anyone. He's such a good character. But all of them are very well edged out. And, while both your books are set in Delhi, it's true, and they all, in fact, there's almost like Nilanjana was telling me, you're doing a series of Delhi life almost, through your books, which is great. But there's also a lot of Calcutta reflected in both your books, Club life is one example, with the Saturday Club, the Bengal Club, and so on here. Gymkhana Club, Turf Club in Delhi. But also, in yours, I know Black River refers to the Yamuna. But my first thought when I saw the book was, it could be that river of migration that takes place, not just from here, but from Bangladesh as well, which sort of flows through the country and which is largely invisible. It's there, we know about them, and yet we don't think about them, isn't it?
That's a lovely poetic way to see it. And one of the things that I discovered only after we'd settled on the title is my editor turned around and said, have you ever Googled Black River? And so we did. She was in another city and we were both looking at our screens. And I realized there's a Black River everywhere. And somehow at that moment you realize that as deeply rooted as a book might be in Delhi, I wrote it for the characters really. I wrote it for the people, because they themselves had things to say and they built the city. They're not just objects of, I think one of the reasons why Anuja's book sings so beautifully is because with each of your characters, behind the fun and the humor and the laughter, you give them a lot of respect. You see them for what they are. And you don't try to massage them into being more serious or more virtuous than they need to be. And likewise, once I saw that every country, every continent has a Black River, you just understand that somewhere in the depths of all our cities, there's the landscape, that's one. And second, there's the history. There's the history of how cities are built, and whether it's Calcutta or Delhi or Bombay, every one of them is built by this river of people who flow in and flow out, and sometimes they're rejected. And sometimes, somehow, they find a way to cling.
Very true. One other character from your book who I really liked was Mala Dogra. Mala D, you refer to her fondly somewhere. I suppose there's only a certain generation that will recognize, what that means. But nevertheless, I thought there's so much left unsaid in that character. No? So much depth that is there and yet not there. So you can actually imagine her the way you want, She's like everyone's known auntie, that sort of person. Yeah, very interesting.
I have huge affection for aunties. I'm an auntie. My friends are aunties. I love aunties. There's so much depth there, so much that you can go into if you want to. Yeah.
When I was reading your book, I felt like I was sitting there at the club, mostly when the tambola was going on, maybe sipping a drink and watching the activities. And it all seemed very familiar and comforting. These things do happen, a fight, elections, and so on. In your book, I was there at the abattoir, and I was there when the baby was born, when Munia was born at the hospital. I was not so comfortable, I was there as a reader, sitting there watching, but the blood, the slime, that was a very different world, from the worlds that we know. If it was so difficult for me as a reader to sit there and watch it happening, it was almost very vivid in front of me. How difficult was it as a writer to put that down on paper?
Well, I hope no one hates me for this, but I find murder very calming. I find writing about blood and guts and all of that, it's a place... Sorry. I failed the psychopath tests, I checked. Anyway, but you're talking about the slaughterhouse section, which is where Chand, new to the city, he's found a friend in the butcher who's his employer, and he walks around the slaughterhouses. And I did that myself some years before I wrote that passage. And I think my first reaction to that was shock. This was this is not a genteel part of the city at all. But somewhere in the middle of, all of those rivers of blood and the guts and the mountains of entrails and everything, the kites circling overhead, I suddenly realized that this was one of the few places of the city, and I don't mean to dress everything up in prettiness, it's just that it is what it was. It was a meeting point. The old Qureshi butchers and the Hindus who had also walked into the trade. There was no caste, there was no class. The women had also found their way in at some point. And, you walk in, you spend some time sitting down, they clock you, they're like, Acha, Mem Sahib, on tourism visit. And if you come back a few times, though, then the curiosity starts to flow both ways. And you make friends. And I wrote this in tribute to them. So I knew it was going to be uncomfortable for the reader, but I don't see why, we should just want reading to be comfortable and filled with solace. The part with the murder itself, or the part with the birth, I witnessed some of those, with some of the women I met. And again, it wrenches you that in the middle of all of that, the indifference of the doctors, the hardships, everything, there's still this flow of life. There's still such a gladness, Suddenly in the middle of a hospital ward where 3 women are giving birth on the same bed because there's a shortage of beds or whatever, somebody will still come around wildly waving a box of laddus, feeding random strangers, because that's the way we are. And I really wanted to capture as much of that as I was capable of, I only worried about whether it was untrue, not whether it was unreal, but I just worried about it being mawkish. Uncomfortable is fine, we walk through uncomfortable.
This is very real. As a reader, I can tell you it became very real, perhaps too real. Uncomfortable, yes, but certainly not unreal. It's a world, and we recognize that that world exists, and we recognize that it's there all around us. We've also been there, but it's still painful and deeply unsettling, perhaps, not even uncomfortable, But thank you for doing that, because these stories need to be told. There is acceptance and joy in there, and not just pain and agony. I think that's the takeaway from that, that people adapt to all kinds of situations, and people continue to live, and people don't blame others for everything, right?
I guess the only thing I have to say is that Black River was a place to put a lot of the grief and anger that I was feeling at that time. I mean, I just spent 9 years, walking around places so close to Delhi where one story after another was this young girl's been killed, these 3 bodies were found in a well. That haunted me, that sense of women who were missing. But alongside that, there was the other current. And that current of, friendship and what I can only call joy was so real. I think the only thing that scared me about this book was whether I could pull it off, and I still have a question mark about that. Anuja is many, many novels in, and she pulls off something that I would personally not be able to tackle, humor, It's really hard to do humor that lasts. And all of us who are apparently serious novelists, we are very lucky because everyone thinks serious stuff is harder to do. It's difficult only because it's going to work only if you make yourself as vulnerable as the people you're writing about. And if you can do that emotionally, then I think you share a certain kind of truth and hopefully that comes across. But can I ask Anuja a question?
Go ahead.
It's just about the humor thing. It's fine to write a funny piece or an advertisement that lasts for a couple of years. But your books last. And that with humor is so, so hard to do. You know, it's got contemporary touches, but... okay, I'm just going to condense this question in writerly terms. How on earth?
That's 3 words. She's done the advertising.
You know, I find humor is a coping mechanism. The more your life goes to shit, the worse situation that you're in, you know, the kind of things you're describing or the places where people are, really dark places. As a reader and as a writer, I shy away from darkness. My life is not so happy that I can read sad books, honestly, you know. I need to read happy books and I write happy books, what I call happy books in my, you know, in a very simplistic way. But I do find that in real life, the people I meet who are genuinely in dark spaces, whatever those are, those people are hanging in there and they're getting through that time through humor. It's always humor. You know, you're outside, you're in a hospital, you're getting coffee, people have been given terrible verdicts, you don't know what is going to happen there. No matter what the situation is, people cope with humor. It's a huge tool and a huge superpower that we can all flex. If we can just look at it lightly and say, acha, theek hai, ye ho gaya. And the darker the humor is, I find the more powerful it is. Of course, it then becomes a trickier tool to use in writing. But I love it. It's a crayon I love that I go to repeatedly saying, I'll use this and draw with this. And again, like I always say, that just because you have to make a grave point or a heavy point, you don't have to make it heavily. You can make it lightly, and then hopefully it will linger, and people will think about it and come back to it, and come back to it in a way that they can handle it. Because if something is really terrible and it's told in a way that makes it sound terrible, then it crushes you, you cannot deal. But if there's some kind of a handle to it, or there's some kind of bubble and froth, you say, acha, theek hai, copable, not dying, not collapsing, will manage. So I feel that that's important, and that's what I used to cope, and that's what in my writing also I put in there to help people cope. I get a lot of people writing to me saying that, you know, I read this book while I was in a dark place. You know, this was happening in my life, that was happening in my life, I was in so-and-so situation, and thank you, because it really worked for me at that point. And that always makes me feel really happy and say, acha, theek hai, I do a stupid, shallow thing, but maybe there's something to it. Yeah.
And that's why you're one of our bubbliest, liveliest, happiest authors, aren't you? All right. We have about 15 minutes to go. So does the audience have any questions at this point? Several hands. Okay. Gentleman at the front first, and then I'll come back to you both for some questions. Just trying to include the audience a little bit. Okay, the mic's gone back.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm Suchandra Datta. Really charmed to listen to your an inspiration which you gave me just now, and even to you, ma'am. My question is, how difficult was it to pull along from advertisement to writing? It was something, you know, from getting a long stretch elasticity. So this elastic movement, can you just tell me, ma'am, I mean, inspire us to just know how you got it started. How you got it started.
Okay, so I wrote my first book in 2006, when I was very deeply immersed in the world of advertising. I was doing cola advertisements for Pepsi, and they were all a lot to do with cricket. So the only thing I knew well at that point was cricket and advertising. But I was, like I said, I've said this many times, is that it was a struggle for control. You have no creative control. You get a lot of really sexy crayons to draw with, you know. You get movie stars, you get cricketers, you get huge buckets, you get big directors. But what you can draw with all that is a very limited and very simplistic little drawing. You can't do much with it. And I was desperate to do more, to write more. And it was actually at a very big shoot, you know, that we were shooting a big Pepsi commercial, which had 2 stars from the north. You know, we had Shah Rukh Khan and Saif Ali Khan. We had Surya and Madhavan from the south. And we were shooting them back to back. And we had Preeti Zinta, the heroine, who was starring in both north and south productions. I had written the script with so much love, so much hope. I'd done so much detailing. Because we had that limited time, they were dumbing it down. We were just going, chalo, chalo, jaldi, 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 ho gaya, ho gaya. And I realized that this is not what I was writing. And it's being dumbed down hugely. And I had no power in that situation, you know. And I went back to my hotel room. It was a very fancy hotel. I sat there with this laptop they'd just given me because I got a promotion. So for the first time in my life, I had a MacBook. And I started writing a book that night, because I said, koi fayda nahi hai, I'll achieve nothing doing this, I'll only be, you know. And I started writing the book. I wrote the premise for the Zoya Factor, which was my first book, set in the world of cricket and advertising, because, you know, write what you know, it was what I knew. And the next day I went back to the shoot, and Shah Rukh Khan, who's so sweet, said, what happened? You were very troubled yesterday, how did you resolve it? And I said, I'm writing a book. And he said, okay, write a book, I'll make a movie with your book. And that gave me enough enthusiasm to keep going and to keep writing. And he just said it because he's so sweet, so he says these things. But I actually wrote the whole book for creative control, to say that, theek hai, I won't get the budget and I won't get anything else, but it will be mine. So that was important for me. Freedom of location was important to me. If I didn't work in advertising, I could be home at home all day with my 3 growing children. I could write politically incorrect things. That was 2006. You could write anything you wanted. Not today, where you have to think 50 times before you put even a toe out of line. So it's a different world. So I could write it then. That's how I wrote the book. For 4 years, I did both things. I worked full-time in advertising. I worked as a full-time writer. When 2 books came out and they were successful enough for me to think that I can earn the same money doing this, then I jumped. And I said, acha, theek hai. Now I can do this full time because I've stabilized this. So it was a crazy 4 years because, you know, the children, the work, everything, the books. But once I was done, I was so happy that I had taken that call. That's how it worked out.
For sure, I think finance is a big concern when you're jumping like that. And, you know, but you do want your own canvas to write on. So at some point, you know, the desire for that canvas overtakes everything else. But then you also have to be practical, wouldn't you say? You know? Yeah. Debanjan had a question. I'll come to you, young man.
Thank you. And Radhika, I note with some alarm your probing comments on jumping careers, not yet, as a colleague. Anuja, I had a question for you. One of the things that has really struck me while reading your books is your fantastic ear for dialogues. Does that come from your experience in advertising? And some of the humor that Nilanjana mentioned comes from those dialogues. I remember, I think it was in the house that, those Pricey Thakur girls, where a character, a tailor addresses someone as Madam G with a B. And it's just so, like, you know, phonetically it's right, but there's something else happening. You have it kind of at this wicked twist with the word dumb inside Madam G, and, you know, it's just, all of that is just fascinating. I mean, just tell us a little bit about that.
I enjoy dialogue. I love writing dialogue. And I giggle so much if I go somewhere and someone is saying something and I'm like hanging on to that pronunciation because I love it. So I think maybe over the years I've just gotten, you know, I mean, like, I remember that guy, he's called Mayor Dumbaji. And he talks to me like that. And my sister had a tailor she called Dolat Master. His name was Dolat Master. And she used to call him Dolat Master because she said, Jab tak is aadmi ko do lat nahi maro, ye aadmi kuch nahi karega. Which is so rude. But I enjoy dialogue. I love phonetics. And, you know, the more cities I live in, whether it was Bangla or now I'm living in Bangalore, I enjoy dialogue. I eavesdrop. So if that's something people like to do, it's great fun to listen in and hear people talk and just celebrate phonetics and language and stuff like that. Yes, it's advertising training as well, of course, because they do stress on that in a big way. But generally, I love listening to people talk. I push hot chocolate towards them. I push wine bottles towards them and say something, and then I listen.
There is one of those in Club You to Death also. I'm sure there'll be many, but I caught on to one, which is Bambi Toddy, is referred to as Bamboo Toddy by the gardener.
My boy said bamboo toddy,
And
bro.
she does give them a bamboo at the end, actually, so, without giving anything away. Sorry. I'm sure everyone's read it by now, no? Yeah. Okay. Now the young man in front.
Hi, this question is for Nilanjana. I'm a huge fan. I went to college a few years after you did and studied the same subject. So I love the Wildings. I just love it. On your feline friends in Nizamuddin. And I think it's such a superbly crafted book. I think it's India's answer to Old Possum's book of practical cats, honestly. I love that book. So could you talk a little bit about it? It's not a very specific question, but what your trigger was for it, and if you plan more investigations in that space.
Thank you so much. The Wildings was, it came out of, again, going for long walks and finding lots of stray cats around who had things to say. You know, they were like, okay, you know, the politicians have a lot to say. You guys have a lot to say. We have a view on what neighborhoods are and what, you know, life in Delhi is like. And would you kindly be my secretary? So that's pretty much where it came from. Then the Wildings expanded on its own. You know, stray dogs stepped in. This guy whom I was very fond of called Doginder Singh, who has a position. He's the God. He's the god of the dhaba. And then there were two squirrels called Ao and Jao. And then I hopefully, by this time, I kind of sensed what was happening to my editor at the other end. So I introduced a clan of pigs. And I introduced 4 beetles. And he said, look, this is as far as we can push it. The pigs must go. The beetles can stay, but do they have to be called John, Paul, George, and Ringo? So and at that point, I mean, I'd love to do, I don't know whether I can make this work, but I'd love to do a little bit of noir fiction and come back to the 3rd volume of The Wildings, because I promised people that Monsoon, who was Mara's daughter, Mara being the lead character in The Wildings, a goofy orange cat who's got very long whiskers and can talk to tigers very, very loudly, waking up the entire neighborhood, you know. So I have to come back to this, but thank you so much.
I'm beginning to realize why the 3 of us have bonded like this. I mean, we had fun inside. This is the animal ladies group. She looks after stray dogs. I do. You do. And we have common murderous intentions. We love the bottle of wine. Lots and lots of interesting commonalities here. Lady at the back. No, I will come back to you since you've already. This young lady, yes.
Good evening. My question is for Anuja ma'am. I'm a big fan of yours. So, multiple of your books have been adapted on screen. So, what you mentioned beforehand, the creative liberty which was missing in your previous profession. So, do you put down that creative liberty by writing your characters in such a way that you're forced to think that it was meant for this particular actor? So, when I was reading the Club You to Death, so ACP Bhavani was screaming Gajraj Singh to me.
Oh my God, he's my top choice, but no one else wants him.
So I was thinking that maybe you are not like too overconfident that this is going to be selected by some producer, but at least you had in your mind that if it ever gets on screen, this actor has to play this. So you write it that way. Am I right?
No, but you are so right on Gajraj Singh. Gajraj Rao? Is it Gajraj Rao? I know. But yeah, he's amazing. I love him, and he was so much on my brain, and I've shamelessly been pushing him at Mad Dog Films, who are the studio who has bought the rights, and they are like, okay, Anuja, we hear you, we are on it, don't tell us what to do. But for me, yes, he was you know, he was someone who was definitely on my mind for that. But no, when I write books, I don't think about who's going to play the character or whatever, because that is creative death. And because I've done that in advertising now, 17 saal kiya hai maine. I've written, and you know how soul-destroying it is to write a beautiful script and then know, I'm sorry to say this is Calcutta, but to know that Saurav Ganguly is going to be saying those lines. And you know how bad his acting skills are. And I have seen him, I've just sat there and said, क्या मैंने सोचा था और क्या ये आदमी बोल रहा है. So I don't go to that place of casting people in my brain because that will limit what I'm trying to do with the character, you know. So I write books. I love writing books. And if somebody comes along from Bollywood and they want to make a movie or from anywhere in the world, I'm very happy to receive them and do a little aarti and say, "Ha, le jao," because like we said, writing doesn't pay very well. And I will get more readers. I get more readers. I get more importance. I get invited to Litfests if my books are made into movies, right? So it's important. So I would give it that importance. But no, I don't let it. Writing is my mandir, my laptop. When I open it, it's holy for me. I keep it very clean. I don't get into all this.
All right, lady in blue there, second row, I think, third row.
Good evening. This is for Nilanjana, ma'am. Ma'am, I would just like to mention that you said that capable of much as you can. I would like to know, ma'am, how difficult was it to venture to find your character alive and to bring us the alive characters in your writings?
That's a lovely question, but it literally happened when I was standing on the ITO bridge on a particularly polluted Delhi winter day. And I was facing towards that stream of people who are coming out in the evening from the railway station. And I saw Chand, the lead character, you know. And he was standing there. He wasn't a real person, but I blinked because for a second he was so real. And he was just standing there and he was looking down at this eddy of people. And his face was alight. This was a very young Chand, and I didn't realize, I knew nothing about this guy. You know, but he was real. And what he was standing there and telling me is that this is not just a crowd. I don't like crowds. Litfest crowds accepted. But as a rule, I'm nervous around, you know, large groups of people and stuff. And he was just saying, no, listen, the air is crackling with dreams. That was the first sentence of the book that I heard. And one by one, they show up. You know, there's a kind of quiet space that you get into. And if you allow yourself that quiet time when you're walking around or when you finished work and you're just sitting there and you're not Instagramming or not on Twitter, something happens. And every one of the characters showed up, you know, sometimes Khalid typically was just wandering around the place with something to show me that was weird, like a bird's feather or whatever. And Rabia had things to say. You know, Rabia had a lot of opinions. And then after that, you just sit down and it's your job to get to know them better, which happens over a period of time. It's like a friendship, you know. It opens up in steps.
We have 2 minutes to go. All right. And then I will ask my last question.
Yeah, hi, this is Aditya. So I'm actually from non-fiction background in Delhi. Then I shifted to Bombay and started working, like pitching on the fiction things. One of the main problems I started facing is developing characters. Coming from a non-fiction background, we have been dealing with, you know, real life people, real life stories. So we really, when we are making a story, we really don't have to build characters. All we have to do is like study people like Amit Shah or Modi or Mamta Banerjee. But in the fiction sector, when I started, you know, to develop concepts, when I have to think of like 5 characters about whom I have no clues, I just have a basic concept. So they need to have different personalities, they need to have different mood swings, they need to have different depth. So how do you actually deal with it? I guess you coming from advertising still have been dealing with fiction, but you coming from the journalistic background, how did you manage to start creating fictional characters after dealing with you know, real life characters for such a long time?
Actually, would Anuja like to come in on that first? Because, you know, you've had much more experience at.
I don't look at, I mean, yeah, sure, Amit Shah and Modi are great to look at, but I mean, look at your cleaning lady or your dhobi or the guy who delivers anything or your best friend or your best friend's dad or some girl who'll never look at you twice. These are all people in your life, all there for the milking. You can get your revenge on them. You can do your little character analysis on them. You can do whatever you like. So I would just, life is inspiration. Yeah, yeah, it's all there.
You know, Aditya, I find my in-laws to be great fodder for this, you know, to be honest. They are characters and they bring in everything.
Yeah. I can be of absolutely no help here because from the time I was 5, I've always had, imaginary friends, fictional characters wandering around somewhere, towards the left part of the back attic or whatever you want to call it. But an easy way to do it is if you're thinking about somebody who might be a good character, do you know their childhood? And do you know how they'd handle two things, falling in love and being in tremendous trouble? If you know those three things, then you pretty much got them.
That's a really good answer, actually. I mean, she's just given you the theory of it, Anuja's is always better. We're almost out of time. So very quickly, Anuja, what's next? You've gone from rom-com to rom-crime.
Rom-crom. So my latest rom-com is set in Bangalore, which for me is a huge thing. Yeah, so I think my 5th book was my most Kolkata book, which was, the IAF book, Baz, which is about this boy who's, it's set in 1971. It's a war of liberation for Bangladesh. That was my most Cal book. I'm just mentioning it here to say that it's not like I don't love everybody here. But this is my Bangalore book. It's set in, I think my last 2 books have been very posh. One is set in like Delhi Turf Club or, like any of the fancy clubs you all have in this city or anywhere else. And before that was Pricey Thakur Girls, was again like a very pricey kind of a neighborhood in Delhi. So this is a very bazaar, it's a mystery on Commercial Street in Bangalore, which is a very commercial district. It's Sarojini Nagar, it's a New Market, or it's that kind of a place. There's a murder happening there, and that's what I'm writing. It comes out this year around Diwali time.
We will look forward to that. How about you, Nilanjana?
I'll make this quick because I think we're pretty much out of time. But I keep getting accused of having written a thriller with Black River. And it's not a particularly good thriller. There's 2 suspects and you're going to figure it out damn fast. But you still want to know what's happened in the end.
There's also 2 murders.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of murder in the book. Once you start murdering people, fictionally speaking, you can't stop. But I do like noir fiction because the moment you label something thriller, detective, whatever, you can smuggle a lot of other stuff in. So I'm going to stay with this for a while. And because, I've tried yoga, I've tried meditation. This is purely for selfish reasons. I like the clockwork of a murder mystery. But yoga didn't calm me down. In fact, it just sent the blood rushing to my head, and then I got even more excitable. Meditation was wonderful, but it's just like switching the imagination on full blast at the end of a very quiet, peaceful meditation session. But when you sit down to write murders and you pull it off and the knife sticking there, out of somebody's ribs, you're very, very calm and very, very at peace with yourself.
It's very satisfying, isn't it? And on that note, we've got the signal to get off the stage. But a quick word of thanks to Anjum, Maina, and the entire AKLF team. Thank you so much. You're wonderful. And we've waited with bated breath for this year's edition and now next year's edition as well. So thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure, Anuja, Nilanjana. And thank you for being such a lovely audience.
And a big thank you to Radhika for doing such a fantastic job.
Thank you, Radhika. You're amazing.